What's your glitch in the Matrix story? Fiank and I moved to a new apartment in January. After we unpacked the kitchen stuff, I realized I couldn't find one of the pot lids. Complained about it off and on for the next 10 months until I found it last month in a drawer I use nearly every time I cook. It was maddening. Fiank had something to do with it. I'm 90% sure. That's a good possibility. He likes to mess with me. I have a fairly unique face. Big chin that's kind of crooked and sleepy eyes, think Mike from Breaking Bad eyes. I also have blonde hair with streaks of white in it. In the 90s I grew it long. So, fairly unusual look all around, particularly since the area I lived in was majority black. I was waiting to cross the street, and across the street there was this guy that looked a lot like me, down to what I was wearing. We are just kind of staring at each other. As we cross, we both slow down and actually come to a full stop to just stare at each other. We didn't just look a lot alike, we were ducking identical. I may have imagined it, but I think he even had the same scar on his eyebrow. The light changed. Cars honked and we both scurried across in opposite directions. We both looked back and then kept going. Still kind of freaks me out. This is so incredibly benign that it's barely worth mentioning. But it's both the insignificance of the lost item and the possibility that maybe that for an incredibly brief second I had a Douglas Adams-esque wormhole open up near me that makes it memorable. I dropped a stamp the other day. I watched it as it fell to the floor. I did not take my eyes off it at all. I didn't blink or look away. Just before it touched the ground it completely vanished. I checked under the desk. I checked under the chair. I moved the desk for a more thorough check. I flipped the chair over to examine the bottom. I checked inside both my shoes. I checked inside my socks. I took the drawers out of the desk and searched them. It had fallen so straight and so gradually that there ought to have been no way to miss it. The void claimed a stamp. I was walking down a semi-crowded sidewalk. A good amount of people, but not too many. Ick now. Anyways, pointers. This woman in front of me tripped and stumbled a bit, sending her phone into the air and onto the ground. I saw and heard this phone hit the ground, saw it shatter, and then I blinked, and it was back in her hand, perfectly fine. She was walking like nothing happened. I think I have told this story before. A couple of years ago my parents, sister and I went to a cousin's wedding in Granada 5 hours away from my hometown. We stayed the night. We headed back home next morning around 11 AM. We were gossiping about some drama that happened on the wedding. I was having cake for breakfast. Suddenly my sister goes, "Is that Cerro Negro, a volcano visible from Leon, my hometown?" That was impossible because we have just hit the road like 20 minutes ago. Then we saw all the welcome to Leon billboards. There is no way we drive for 5 hours without noticing. The drama was not that interesting, and a cake wouldn't have last 5 hours in my hands onto shade. Besides, between Leon and Granada there is Zalotlan Lake and Managua. Managua is the capital city, both extremely hard to miss. We double checked the clock and our cell phones. It was 11:20. TL doctor, we were 5 hours away from our hometown and somehow we make it back home in about 20 minutes. True story that still scares the shit out of me for reasons I don't understand. I was 15 at the time. Had a dream where I went to this arcade I'd normally frequently go. I was with my buddy, and before walking outside to wait for our ride we both buy sodas to go. We are squatting outside on the curb holding our drinks, looking into the parking lot. I finish my drink, and for no reason I start putting my hand in my soda cup and continually throw ice out of the cup onto the ground. I pause for a second and say softly to myself, how deja as even in my dream I was thinking I'd seen this somewhere before. I then lift my head up, look left, and see two kids with skateboards riding. And then I wake up. About 10 days later, I'm at the arcade again with my same buddy. Before walking out to wait for our ride we both buy sodas. We go outside and sit on the curb in the same spot in my dream. I finish mine, and again I start repeatedly throwing ice out of the cup. I pause and say softly to myself, huh, deja vu. I freeze in pure terror. realizing I was repeating the same actions in my dream, and recognizing that the déjà vu I had in my dream was only déjà vu because it's now happening 10 days later. I slowly crank my head to the left because I heard some noise, and to my further shock I see two kids walking towards me with skateboards in their hands. I sprung to my feet and started flipping out with my buddy still sitting, confused and asking me what was wrong. For what it's worth, purchasing a soda while leaving and throwing ice out of my cup aren't normal rituals. In fact, it was the first time I could remember doing either of those two things. When I was in the university, I rented a larger apartment with 3 friends. One night, I saw this super vivid dream, which I remembered after waking up completely and in high detail. It was about our friends who had married recently and were on a honeymoon at that time. I explained the dream, including all the small details, to my roommate. The dream was an exchange in our living room, where the newlywed wife of my friend was reading today's newspaper, while we guys 5 of us discussed other stuff. She suddenly raised her head from the paper and asked if we had today's paper. I responded by laughing and asking if she was having so much fun at her honeymoon that she lost the track of time. 2 weeks later, the couple have returned and were visiting us. At some point of the evening we sat down to the sofa group, exactly to the same seats where I saw us in the dream. I didn't remember my dream at that moment. A few minutes later, she started reading the paper while we talked. Then the situation started to escalate. The memory came back big time. She raised her head from the paper asking for today's paper, and I lost control of my own actions. In complete shock, I realized I could not do anything else than laugh and say those exact words my dream had me saying. At this point, my friend who I explained the dream to earlier had gone completely white on his face. I was sweating and gasping air after exiting the robot mode, and everyone around the table was looking at us. The rest of the night we discussed if time is a roamable dimension after all, and if there are wormholes through the multiverse to other points of time. That was my glitch in the Matrix. Once upon a time I worked at a pizza shop and had to wash dishes at the end of the day. I was in the back, sweeping the floor, while a faucet poured water into a big, commercial 3-hole sink. This faucet was super duper loud. Someone came back to talk to me, and I couldn't hear them over the roaring faucet. Without thinking about it consciously, from way across the room, I extended my hand and kind of made a squeezing motion and the ducking faucet turned off. The guy trying to talk to me went pale and left the room, and it was never spoken of again. I still don't know what he wanted, and I've never been able to reproduce this moment of telekinesis, or whatever it was. I have this very distinct and vivid memory of my childhood. When I was 4, I climbed the fridge to get to the top, because that's where the candy was hidden. When I got to the top, I reached up with one hand to grab the candy box, but couldn't hold on with the other and fell, hitting the back of my head. I had to get stitches and there is still a bald spot from the impact. The problem is, this story never happened. The real story of the scar is that I was walking down the stairs, slipped and hit the back of my head that way. From the age of 4 until 26, I never mentioned it or ever talked about it with my family. Then one day the conversation came up randomly, and I got to tell the story of the fridge climb to my parents. They said that never happened, and the real story was a stair fall. I have zero recollection of the stair fall, and I can still visualize the fridge climb. I gave up after a while of trying to convince my parents of my version, because they said they literally saw the stair fall and subsequent visit to hospital etc. And I didn't want to sound crazy. To this day I don't know how the duck this is possible. Either something from that fall loosened something inside my mind and implanted a new story, or there was an actual glitch in the Matrix and I lived parallel universes at the same time in that one moment. Both options seem likely to me. I remember the crash. My dad whilst boned in his greenness and it was emerald green. I loved the color, which wrote off the car. I remember telling the police all about it at the scene. I remember my parents telling me to tell the doctors that my neck and chest hurt even though they didn't. I remember having a week off of school which was fun. I remember my dad berating the insurance company over the phone. So a few years ago, When my dad bragged about how he had never been in an accident, I took the smug pleasure of correcting him and reminding everyone about the accident. Only everybody looked at me like I was going crazy. According to everybody in my family, my dad has never had a Nissan, and that he would never have or drive a green colored car because he thinks they're unlucky. I've pushed it, insisted it, told my family everything I remember, and they all say exactly the same thing as above. That has got to be a past life memory. That or he died in that crash, but his conscious entered a universe where he lived, but the crash never happened. Years ago, some friends were staying at my house for a while. Anyway, I wake up one morning, make coffee and go to make toast, but the toaster isn't where it's always been. I figure one of the friends moved it, so I checked the cabinets. Every single cabinet. Check the pantry. Even all of the appliances, a stove, microwave, refrigerator, dishwasher. Then checked everywhere a second time. Toaster has vanished. One of the friends comes downstairs. I ask if he's seen the toaster. He goes through the same routine, checking everywhere. No toaster. His wife comes downstairs. Same routine. Still no toaster. We're all still in the kitchen, talking about how the freaking toaster just disappeared. I open the pantry to get something else. There's the toaster front and center, at eye level. We had looked there at least 6 times. None of us had left the kitchen at any point and nobody else entered it. Friend takes the toaster out of the cabinet, grabs a large knife out of the drawer, cuts the cord off the toaster and tosses it out. I bought a new toaster that afternoon. Didn't want to use a haunted toaster. Getting money out of an ATM. Put my card in. Entered my PIN and that chose the amount of money I wanted. I was waiting about 5 minutes for my card and money to come out when nothing did. Starting freaking out trying to call the bank. When I looked in my wallet, my card exactly where it was before I took it out, but with no money in my wallet. Weirdest experience ever. Girlfriend was there too and also saw me put my card in the machine and enter my PIN etc. This happened about a month ago. I took a bowl of leftover pasta out of the refrigerator and set it on the counter. I turned to get some bread, and when I turned back it was not there. I'm 100% sure that I had the bowl in my hands at one point. I looked for at least 15 minutes for it, all over the house. I remember looking for it in the sink. I thought I was losing it. I called my wife and left several messages. When she got home from class I told her about it, and she said that she had it for lunch, and there the bowl was in the sink. It still bothers me to think about it. An older woman at a grocery store left the lights on her car and the battery died. I saw her trying to get it started. I went over and asked her if she needed help. She said she wasn't sure what was wrong. I looked and said the battery was dead, but I have cables and can help her. I gave the car a jump and she was good to go. She thanked me and left. I went into the store and came back out and there was another older woman in the same make, model and color of her car parked a row over with a car that wouldn't start. I was sure it was her and walked over and asked what happened now. The woman looks at me confused and said we've never met before. It was a different woman. I thought I was going insane. Her issue was with the starter. Rocked the car a bit and it started. Not my story, but my dad's. He was fishing with some friends, and when they came back to where the car was parked, discovered that someone had came and stolen gas from the cars parked there. My dad and his friends walked into town to get gas. They came back to the car, filled up, and left. A few days later my dad drove by where the gas station was. There was nothing there, no building, just a fence surrounding a lot full of weeds that could not possibly have grown that high and thick in a few days. Had a cat I rescued from the shelter, living with 2 other guys in a house that did not allow pets. Cat got out and ran away. 2 years later I was at the shelter looking for another rescue cat. I recognize Yoko, my cat from 2 years ago. She answered to her name and jumped into my arms when she saw me. Rescued the same cat twice. My friend and I were once outside his house while he changed his girlfriend's car battery. It was after dark and it was super foggy out that night. We were just talking when suddenly a white light flashed from everywhere for a split second. We looked around to see what cold caused it, but didn't see anything. None of the neighbors' lights were on. No cars were nearby. Nothing. To this day, we remain convinced that a Terminator went back in time to his neighborhood. I was waiting for my son's football match to start, so I went to get a coffee. There was 2 people serving. One was a lady who was bending down sorting out stuff under the counter and a bloke standing up. He looks at me and asks, "What you having, mate?" I reply, "Black coffee please." "No problem," he says. "Sugar." "2 please, mate," I say. The lady stands up and nods at me as if to say hello. I nod back and turn around to see if my lad's game has started. When I turn my attention back to the coffee stand, they are back in the same position. "What you having, mate?" he says again. Black coffee," I say. "No problem." "Sugar." To the lady straightens and nods at me. It was so weird that I felt off for the rest of the day. I regret not saying, "Didn't we just do this?" But for whatever reason I just wandered off. When I was 8 and my sister was 12, my parents got us both parakeets for Christmas. Terrible loud as heck gift. What were they thinking? I had a yellow one I named Sunny and my sister had a blue one named Skylar. They were the first pets we had that were exclusively ours. And we played with them every day for about 3 months. We taught them a couple tricks like to fly and perch on our fingers and follow our other finger around side to side. Made them look like they were dancing, I think. Anyway, my burb Sunny was in a freak accident and eventually died of his injuries. I was heartbroken, rip fam. A few months later my dad's job gets transferred to a city 3 hours away. My sister was told she needed to release Skylar to the Wildacker suburbs cause she wasn't going to move with the family. So in a tearful ceremony we opened Skylar's cage, and that bad bolted out of there, flew over the neighbor's house to be gone forever. So we thought. Flash forward almost 5 years later, living in a new city, having completely forgotten about the birds. My family goes camping to a state park just outside of town for a week. During our little family trip to this beautiful corner of Texas, me and my sister decide to go play on the jungle gym, and while we are sitting on the top, a light blue parakeet identical to Skylar comes flying down and lands right next to us on the jungle gym, letting out a friendly chirp. Me and my sister both froze and looked at each other and back at the bird and slowly say, "Skylar." The bird lets out another friendly chirp, and I decide that this is definitely Skylar. I stick out my finger next to her, and she jumps on my finger, just like we had taught her almost 2 years before. And I start to move my finger on my other hand side to side, and she starts swaying, just like we taught her. Me and my sister lose our shit. Our long lost bird had found us. We say we have to take her back home, and the bird lets out another little chirp and flies away. We couldn't shut up about it for weeks after. TL Dr. My long lost parakeet found me after 2 years. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.